Seriously? This ain't a rescue center for circus acts. The man's voice rang across the echoing hall, followed by a burst of cruel laughter from the onlookers. Every eye turned to the girl at the entrance. Thin, pale, barely 15. Her jacket too big for her shoulders and her shoes soaked from the icy slush outside. She didn't flinch. She simply kept walking, clutching a tattered leash in one trembling hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. Behind her trailed no dog, no companion, no animal at all. Just the emptiness of her footsteps against the marble floor of the Monroe Canine Institute's grand auction arena. It was the annual Elite Canine Rehoming Gala, a glitzy event where wealthy families came to bid on top-tier retired service dogs, decorated war dogs, medal winners, canines trained to detect explosives, protect presidents, and disarm enemies. The place wasn't meant for someone like her, especially not alone. A woman in a satin dress leaned to her husband, whispering something with a smirk. A group of teenage boys near the back snorted when she passed, and one mimicked a barking sound under his breath. She ignored them all. At the front, a sharp-eyed coordinator named Lorraine Cross cleared her throat and stepped down from the stage, heels clicking like judgment. "Miss Clara," the girl whispered. "Clara Elridge. I have a letter." Lorraine took the paper reluctantly. Her expression shifted the moment she read the bold official stamp at the top, the U.S. Military Canine Division. Her eyes flicked down the paragraphs, then darted back up to Clara, suspicious now, not of a prank, but something heavier. Clara's voice was small but steady. "I'm here for King." That name did it. A wave moved through the crowd like a ripple in glass. King. Everyone knew the legend. The German Shepherd, who'd disarmed 5 IEDs in Syria, saved 3 squads in a Kabul ambush, and dragged a wounded commander across a minefield under heavy fire. King hadn't been seen in public for a year. He'd vanished from the listings. Without explanation. Word was he'd turned dangerous, unfit for further service, too broken to be rehomed. "He won't respond to anyone anymore," Lorraine said tightly. "He's aggressive, distrustful. Even his handler couldn't reach him in the end." "I'm not here to bid," Clara said. "I'm here to bring him home." Laughter erupted again. Someone at the back shouted, "Hope you brought armor, sweetheart." Clara's fingers curled tighter around the leash. "He knew my brother, Ezra Elridge. They were together during the bombing in Mosul." A hush. Clara didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Ezra's name still meant something, especially to the veterans and officers standing along the back row who had seen the casualty lists with their own eyes. Ezra Elridge had died protecting others during a failed evac. It was King who had dragged his body out of the rubble. Lorraine faltered. "He hasn't made a sound in 11 months. Won't eat if anyone watches. Doesn't let anyone near his cage. If we release him and he panics..." Clara simply nodded. The gate creaked. 2 guards appeared with tranquilizers ready, hands hovering near the triggers. From the far end of the corridor, heavy paws echoed. The moment King appeared, the entire room stilled. He looked nothing like the framed photos hanging in the auction's entrance. His coat was dull, his ribs visible. His eyes, once praised for being as alert as fire, were cold and unreadable. He was a shadow of the soldier he once was, muzzled, dragged by a steel chain like a prisoner. Clara didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees. "I don't need you to protect me," she whispered. "Just listen." Something shifted in King's posture. Not much, barely noticeable, but it was there. The tilt of his head, the twitch of his ears. He stared at her, as if trying to place her face inside a memory buried deep beneath months of trauma. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a blood-stained strip of cloth, part of an old uniform sleeve, faded and worn. Ezra's. She laid it down on the ground. "He used to carry this in his back pocket. You always chased it." King didn't move, not until Clara closed her eyes and repeated the phrase her brother used to say every night. Words only 2 beings in the world would. "Remember, lights out, hero. Stand down." At once the tension in King's body broke. His legs trembled, his eyes glistened, and then, in front of a room full of people who believed he'd forgotten how to feel, King howled, not a cry of rage, but of recognition, of grief, of coming home. The crowd didn't laugh after that. Not one person moved. Not when King tore off his own muzzle trying to reach her. Not when Clara opened her arms and he buried his head against her chest, sobbing like the war had just ended. Lorraine lowered her eyes. One of the guards stepped back, wiping tears from his cheek, and in that massive, echoing hall filled with medals, money, and men in uniforms, the most broken soldier of them all, finally found peace in the arms of a girl who walked in alone but carried the memory of the only one he had ever loved, and that changed everything. For a moment, no one in the auditorium knew what to say. Clara stayed kneeling, arms around King's massive neck, as if holding together something far more fragile than fur and bones. His body shook violently against hers, not from fear or rage, but from a release too long delayed. 11 months of isolation, of forced silence, of watching unfamiliar hands try to feed or touch him without understanding what haunted him, and now, somehow, here he was, recognizing a single voice in a sea of strangers, the voice of a sister whose brother never came home. The scent of Ezra's blood-stained cloth, the sound of that bedtime phrase, it had cut deeper than commands or coaxing. It had reached the soldier that still existed beneath the scars. Lorraine slowly stepped forward, stunned, eyes locked on the impossible scene before her. No one told us he'd react like this. Not even his last handler got that close without tranquilizers. Clara didn't answer. Her focus was still on King, her fingers running gently behind his ears, the way Ezra used to do. "He's grieving," she whispered more to him than anyone else. "You all thought he was angry, but he's just grieving." A hushed murmur passed through the crowd, this time not mocking but shaken. People whispered her name now. Clara Elridge, Ezra's sister, the girl who had never served in war but bore its wounds all the same. Her face, once seen as out of place among pearls and polished shoes, now seemed like the only real thing in the room. The auction had halted completely, forgotten like background noise. Nobody wanted to see the next medal winner now. They wanted to see what would happen next with the lost cause they had all ignored. Even the announcer at the mic stood frozen, his cue cards dangling uselessly from his hands. King, for his part, had not left Clara's side. He sat now, pressed against her hip like a child clinging to the last family they had. His breathing had slowed, but his eyes never left her face. And when she finally stood up, he rose with her, limping slightly, but determined to stay close. Lorraine hesitated before asking the next question. "Clara, why now? Why after all this time?" Clara turned to face the audience for the first time. Her eyes swept over the crowd, not with pride, but with something deeper, something that silenced even the most judgmental mouths. "Because no one ever told me where he went," she said. "They buried my brother. They handed me a folded flag, and they said King was being handled internally. That's all I got. For months, I asked. I wrote letters. I got ignored, until last week." She pulled a second piece of paper from her pocket. This one wasn't official. The handwriting was messy, the ink slightly smudged. It came from Ezra's best friend. He found it cleaning out their old locker. A letter Ezra wrote but never sent. She looked down at it. Her voice cracked. It said, "If anything happens to me, don't let them lock King away. He's not just a dog. He's my reason for making it out alive day after day." There it was, the twist that hit the room like a punch to the heart. King wasn't just a tool, or an asset, or a broken animal unfit for auction. He was a war hero who had already given his everything, and the only person who understood what he needed, what he deserved, was the sister of the man he had tried to save with his final breath. Lorraine blinked hard. You came here alone? With no invitation? No authorization?" "I came with love," Clara said simply. "That's more than anyone else brought for him." At that, one of the guards stepped forward, Mr. Darnell, a quiet man with 30 years in military dog care. He looked at King, then at Clara. "I was there the day they pulled Ezra out," he said softly. "I remember how King wouldn't let go of his body. We had to sedate him just to move them apart." Clara's chin trembled. King looked up at Darnell as if the voice stirred something faint and familiar. "He kept his promise," Darnell added. "He brought Ezra home." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was full of heat, of tears pressed behind eyes, of throats tightening, of souls remembering what they'd tried to forget. Finally, Lorraine gave a nod. "Release him. No more locks. No more muzzles." One of the guards stepped forward, unlocking the remaining restraints from King's harness. As the final clasp clicked free, King leaned his full weight into Clara's legs, as if needing her to hold up what was left of him. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood there with her, one war survivor and one grieving sister, finally reunited by a bond no uniform or protocol could ever manufacture. Then something unexpected happened. Slowly, one by one, people in the audience began to stand. Not for applause, not for show, but in silent, respectful acknowledgement. Some placed their hands over their hearts, others just bowed their heads. Because sometimes, it takes the smallest girl in the room to remind everyone what true honor looks like. And as Clara and King stood beneath the golden lights of that grand stage, they didn't need a medal or an auction number. They already had what mattered, each other. And finally, a way to begin healing, together. As Clara stepped out of the auction hall with King at her side, the cold air hit her like a wall. The echo of the heavy wooden doors closing behind them felt final, like they had just walked away from a battlefield. Only this one was polished in marble and dressed in diamonds. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was pounding too fast, too loud. King walked close, not ahead or behind, but beside her, like he had always belonged there. The parking lot was nearly empty now. The gala had ended quietly, many of the guests leaving in silence, humbled by what they had witnessed. Clara had declined every offer of help, every proposal of transport, even the escort Lorraine had tried to arrange. She didn't need a ride. She needed time, and so she walked, through slush and ice, down the long hill that led away from the Institute until the glow of the building faded behind her and the stars above became the only lights that mattered. King's steps slowed after a while. His limp grew more pronounced. Clara stopped and knelt beside him, brushing snow off his paws. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have come sooner." His eyes met hers, and though he couldn't answer with words, his face said everything. He didn't blame her. He had waited, and somehow she had come. They reached the bus shelter just before midnight. It wasn't heated, but it had a bench and a roof, and that was enough. Clara pulled a folded blanket from her pack, the same one Ezra used to take camping, and spread it across the bench. She sat, and King laid his head in her lap. For a long time, they just breathed together. Each exhale seemed to melt a little more of the wall between them. Clara finally broke the silence. "He used to tell me stories about you. Said you hated thunderstorms but loved peanut butter. Said you'd sneak under his bed in the barracks even though you were twice too big." Her voice trembled. "He called you his shadow." King's tail thumped once, soft, but sure, a ghost of joy rising from under the grief. Clara smiled faintly. "I thought I hated you after he died. I thought maybe if you were really as good as he said, you would have saved him, that you would have pulled him out in time. But now, I know, you tried." The bus arrived with a loud hiss, breaking the quiet. Clara stood, guiding King up slowly. She showed the driver the waiver Lorraine had signed before they left. Official permission to take King under private care. The driver said nothing, just nodded and tilted his head toward the back. A few people looked up as they boarded, then quickly looked away, uncertain how to process the sight of a teenage girl and a haunted war dog climbing onto public transit at midnight. They sat in the last row, King curling close to her feet. As the city passed in streaks of yellow and white through the window, Clara stared into the blur and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But that fragile hope shattered the moment they reached her neighborhood. The moment they stepped off the bus, Clara noticed the lights down the street, flashing, bright, urgent. Police cruisers, ambulances, people huddled behind barricade tape. Her stomach dropped. She ran, calling to King without realizing it, sprinting barefoot through icy puddles, past the corner store and down to the old brick building that housed her foster home. Smoke curled from the upper windows. A firefighter shouted orders as a crew unrolled hoses. "Basement fire!" someone yelled. "It's spreading!" "No," Clara screamed. "My brother's box. His letters. They're in there. Please." A large man in a red helmet turned sharply. "This area is restricted." But King had already taken off. Not running wild, not panicked, but with purpose. Toward the fire, toward the door. Clara ran after him, only to be stopped by the arm of a firefighter. "You can't go in there. That dog is trained," she cried. "He was a military K9. He knows what he's doing." King disappeared into the building's front hallway, weaving around debris and smoke like he'd done it 1,000 times. The man finally let go of Clara and shouted to his team, "Get eyes on that dog. If he finds someone, follow him in." Inside, it was chaos. Flames crawled up one side of the stairwell. Smoke coiled thick across the ceiling. King's ears twitched as he moved, body low to the ground, scanning for movement. Then he stopped, beside a door wedged open just enough for a child to crawl through. With a guttural bark, King pushed forward. Moments later, a firefighter saw movement. The shepherd emerged from the smoke, dragging a box between his teeth, charred at the edges, but intact. Clara screamed and ran forward just as he dropped it at her feet, coughing but alive. Inside the box were Ezra's letters, his last belongings, unread journal entries, dog tags. King collapsed beside them. "Get him oxygen," someone shouted. Clara dropped to her knees, sobbing, pressing her forehead against his. "You didn't save just Ezra," she whispered. "You saved everything I had left of him." And this time, it wasn't just the people at an auction who watched in silence. It was a neighborhood, a rescue team, and a burning building that bore witness to a dog many thought was broken, but who had never stopped being a hero. And for Clara, this was no longer just a reunion. It was a beginning of healing, of remembering, of moving forward, not in the shadow of grief, but in the light of something far stronger, love. The hospital room was quiet except for the low hum of machines and the slow, steady rhythm of King's breathing. He lay on a padded mat beside Clara's chair, a bandage wrapped around one paw, a small oxygen mask resting gently near his muzzle. The vet had said he'd inhaled heavy smoke but would recover if he rested. Clara hadn't left his side since they arrived, not even once. Ezra's box was on her lap, just as he had left it, burnt at the corners, but still intact. The dog tags lay across the top, warm from her touch. She'd read half the letters already, crying silently while King rested. Some were light-hearted, stories from camp, jokes about other soldiers, the usual brotherly charm. Others were darker, written late at night, unsure if he'd survive the next mission. But all of them had one thing in common. They talked about King, not as a tool, not as a weapon, but as a soul. Ezra hadn't just trained a K9. He'd found his other half. A nurse entered softly with warm broth and set it down next to the mat. King lifted his head weakly but didn't move. His eyes found Clara's face and stayed there. "He hasn't taken his eyes off you once," the nurse whispered. "You must mean a lot to him." Clara nodded, unable to speak. She didn't know how to explain it to anyone else, that something unspoken had passed between her and King from the moment he howled in the auction hall. It wasn't just about Ezra anymore. It was about them. Two souls left behind by the same man, both searching for something only the other could offer. As the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the blinds, Clara stood and stretched. She opened the window slightly to let in the morning air. Snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear, brightening slowly, like a promise. Then her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Clara Elridge?" "Yes. This is Sergeant Leo Marston. I was Ezra's commanding officer." She blinked, surprised. "I didn't know you were. I just got word about what happened last night, about King and the fire." Clara's chest tightened. "He saved my brother's things. He went into the house. No one asked him to. He just did it." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice returned, quieter. "That's who he was. That's who he still is. And I owe you an apology. We failed, both of you." Clara didn't reply. "Ezra tried to get us to approve a joint adoption. Said he wanted you and King to be together if anything happened to him. We denied it. Said it would be too complicated. But he was right. You were the only one who could." "Reach him." She lowered the phone slightly, trying to steady her breath. "I'm sending you something," Marston added. Ezra left a recorded message. It was part of a private request, only to be delivered if King went into retirement without him. Clara felt like her knees might give out. She sat down slowly, her eyes burning. He recorded it in the barracks. I think you need to hear it." An hour later, she opened the file in the quiet of that hospital room, with King resting beside her. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Ezra, in uniform, sitting on a bunk with King beside him. His smile was tired but real. "If you're watching this, I guess things didn't go as planned," he said. "But I need you to know something. I didn't train King just to be a soldier. I trained him to be a protector of me, of what I love. So if he's with you now, it means I was right. It means he found you, and it means you're not alone." Clara's hand covered her mouth. She couldn't hold the tears back anymore. "I told Command that King wouldn't respond to anyone else. They didn't believe me. But he always had a soft spot for you, Clara. Every time I read one of your letters, he'd sit by the door like he expected you to walk in." On the video, King looked up at the camera, almost as if recognizing her through the screen. "You, too, belong together. And if the world couldn't see that, then I hope you show them." The video ended. And in the hush that followed, Clara looked down at the real King. He was awake, alert, eyes locked on hers like they had been waiting for her reaction. She reached down, cradling his head in her hands. "We'll show them," she whispered. "I promise." Later that day, the media caught wind of what had happened. The story spread like wildfire. "Disgraced war dog saves girl's home," one headline read. Another said, "Teen in K9 hero defy military red tape." But none of it mattered to Clara, not really. What mattered was the flood of letters that started coming in from soldiers, men and women who had served with Ezra, people who had met King on deployment, families who had lost loved ones but remembered stories about a dog who refused to leave a fallen soldier's side. The world had mocked her when she walked into that auction alone, but now she was no longer just the sister of a dead soldier. She was the keeper of his legacy, the girl who brought a broken hero back to life, the one who made people believe again in the power of memory, love, and second chances. And as the snow melted in the weeks that followed, revealing patches of green and new beginnings, Clara and King started walking again, not toward the past, but toward a future Ezra had quietly prepared, one where grief could live beside healing, and where even the loneliest walks could end with someone waiting at your side. They didn't need applause, or headlines, or medals. They had each other, and somehow, that was everything. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night, the smoke, the screaming, the moment King emerged from the fire dragging Ezra's box, never faded. Clara still had nightmares, sometimes, but they no longer ended in helplessness. Now, they ended with King beside her, nuzzling her arm until she woke up, grounding her in the present. The hospital visits lessened. King's lungs healed faster than expected. The vets called it miraculous. Clara just called it survival instinct, something she and King both shared. They didn't return to the auction center. There was no need. The headlines had taken care of that part. What happened next unfolded quietly, but it was no less important. Clara, now legally King's guardian, was invited to speak at a memorial event for fallen handlers. She almost said no. Standing in front of strangers wasn't something she'd ever done. But when she looked at King curled up at the foot of her bed, breathing deeply in the middle of his second nap of the morning, she realized it wasn't really about her. It never had been. The hall was smaller this time. No chandeliers, no tuxedos. Just folded chairs, soft lighting, and portraits of soldiers lining the walls. The crowd was made up of families, mothers, fathers, siblings, people who'd lost someone to service. No one laughed when Clara walked in. They stood, and when they saw King at her side, there were tears before she even spoke. She stepped up to the podium holding a single card in her hand. Not to read from, just to feel something steady. She took a breath. My brother, Ezra Elridge, didn't come home from his last deployment, but part of him did. His shadow, his friend, his protector. She paused, looking down at King. I didn't understand at first. I thought King had failed, that if he was as good as everyone said, Ezra would still be here. But I was wrong. She looked at the faces in the room. Some nodded, some cried, all listened. King never stopped being a soldier, even after Ezra was gone. Even after the military put him in a cage and gave up on him, he waited. He remembered. And when I came to find him, he remembered me too. She swallowed, forcing herself to continue. The night our house caught fire, he went back in. Not for food, not for toys, but for a box. My brother's box. His last words. His story. And in saving that, he saved more than memories. He saved me. She didn't try to end it with a quote or a perfectly crafted phrase. She just stepped away and sat beside King, who rested his head against her foot. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reverence. After the ceremony, a man approached her outside. He wore a jacket with faded patches and a stiff gait that suggested years of service. His eyes were kind but heavy. I served. With Ezra, he said. He talked about you all the time. Said you had more fight in you than half our platoon. Clara smiled, though it came out crooked. He used to say that, even when I was 6. The man chuckled. He also said King would never bond with anyone else, but maybe he was wrong about that. She shook her head. I don't think he was. I think King knew me before I ever met him, through Ezra. They stood there for a while, watching the sunset behind the building. The man reached into his coat and handed her something small, a coin, gold-rimmed, the kind given for valor. I want you to have this, he said. Ezra earned it, but King deserves it, and so do you. Clara didn't refuse. She took it with shaking fingers and held it close. That night, back home in the small rental they'd moved into, Clara lit a candle and placed the coin in Ezra's box. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she sat beside King on the floor, her back against the wall, watching shadows dance on the ceiling. "I think we're going to be okay," she whispered. King thumped his tail once and let out a low, contented sigh. In the months that followed, life became something quiet and strange, but beautiful. Clara enrolled in a program for trauma therapy, working with children who had lost family members in service. She brought King with her. At first, it was just a comfort thing, having him nearby. But soon, the therapists noticed something incredible. Kids who hadn't spoken in weeks reached for him. Teens who had closed off completely would sit beside him for hours, their hands in his fur. He became something no soldier ever expected to be again, a healer. They weren't the loudest pair in the room, but they were the ones people remembered. And sometimes Clara would sit by herself at the edge of the therapy garden, watching King lie beside a child too broken to speak, and she'd whisper, "They laughed when I walked in alone, but I was never alone, was I?" King would raise his head, tilt it slightly, and stare at her with those deep, human eyes that still held echoes of Ezra, and something even more powerful than memory. Love, forgiveness, loyalty, not just trained, chosen. And long after the world moved on, after the story faded from headlines and became a quiet miracle passed between families like a bedtime legend, one truth remained unshaken. The dog's reaction hadn't just changed everything. It had saved a life. Two, actually. And maybe in the end, that's what Ezra had always planned.